Femi Falana, our highly respected son, has declared that EFCC, ICPC has come to stay.
With profound respect to my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, it's not a new argument, really. When the ICPC was established in the year 2000, there was a case instituted by the Ondo state government against the federal government, and all the other states were defendants. In that case, the Supreme Court subjected the Establishment Act of the ICPC to a serious constitutional interpretation, and came to the irresistible conclusion that by virtue of Section 15 subsection 5, which has imposed a duty on the Nigerian state to fight corruption, the ICPC was properly created by the National Assembly in exercise of its powers under Section 4 of the Constitution. In like manner, the EFCC was also created by the National Assembly to fight other economic and financial crimes. And we must not forget the fact that Nigeria is not operating on its own alone. By the year 2001, Nigeria had been blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, otherwise called Groupe d'Action Financière in French. This body had blacklisted 23 countries for not cooperating enough in the global fight against money laundering. And that each of these 23 countries will have to put in place an agency or a commission to fight money laundering, advanced fee fraud, and other economic crimes. And that was why the EFCC Act was drafted and sponsored by the executive in 2002. As a matter of fact, the law was enacted in 2002. The EFCC was established consequently in April 2023. Again, by 2003, by 2004, the law was amended to take care of other concerns. For me, the ICPC and the EFCC, like the Code of Conduct Tribunal, have come to stay. What we should be demanding are measures to make these institutions autonomous, not under the control of any government. And the Supreme Court has maintained rather repeatedly with respect to the EFCC, that, or the EFCC and ICPC, that these are common agencies, that shouldn't be under the control of the federal government. They are common agencies to fight economic crimes in our country, to fight financial crimes in our country, to fight corruption in our country.
So, Mr. Falana, apologies, if I may jump in quickly. There are those who will say, yes, some of these anti-graft agencies have come to stay. They've been established, they've been doing their jobs. But the question will be, is it established in law that the processes through which they were established in the first place was faulty? Guarantee that they have been established.
No.
But can we say that next time, are we able to learn that the EFCC, for example, was wrongly or faultly established against the constitution of the federal government, considering the processes through which such an establishment should be put in process in the first place?
I am saying, Sheung, the EFCC and the ICPC were established the same way. It was the executive that sponsored the bill under the Olusegun Obasanjo administration. One was established, the law was enacted in 2000, the other one in 2002, amended in 2004. So it's the same method, i.e. anchored, the two bodies were established in pursuance of the duty imposed on the Nigerian state under Section 15, subsection 5, that the Nigerian state, Nigeria shall abolish all corrupt practices and abuse of power.
But Mr. Falana, the legal argument,
the ICPC,
apologies, sir. Mr. Falana, the legal argument is whether or not the federal government can imposingly establish these without the consent of the state, which according to the Constitution has to be carried along. Those are the arguments, isn't it, before the Supreme Court?
No, the Supreme Court made the point in the case of AG Ondo and AG of the Federation that this duty is imposed on the federal government and the state government. And in other words, state governments are also not prohibited from setting up their own agencies. The Kano state government has done that since the time of, I think, of Governor Shekarawu. And that body is fighting corruption. Even though there are efforts by the federal court in Kano to frustrate the work of the agency, I think Oyo State also has its own agency. Even Lagos State enacted its own law. The body has not been put in place. So the state government are also required to set up their own anti-corruption agencies. If they so desire, these bodies are to work with the EFCC and the ICPC so that the menace of corruption and other economic crimes in our country can be frontally attacked. But you know, this battle is ideological. We are talking of big people, former governors, sitting governors, president, and the rest of them. But nobody is talking of the poor. Today in Lagos, and this has not interested your medium. Today in Lagos, 22 young people were arrested for trying to lay a wreath in memory, in honor of those who were killed in Lekki or in Lagos State during the NSAS protest in 2020. On Tuesday, about 76 Nigerians are going to be charged with treasonable felony for protesting against worsening economic conditions in the country. But it's only when it concerns the rich or the bourgeoisie. Oh, this law meant to fight corruption is illegal. This law meant to fight money laundering is illegal. But I am saying the Supreme Court has made the point. And not just in one case. AG Ondo State and AG of the Federation, Governor Shema and FRN, Dari and FRN, Yame and FRN, and so on and so forth.
Mr. Falana, so apologies. Yeah, the question, and by the way, sir,
properly created to fight.
But by the way, sir,
that's the position of the law.
Yeah, we are covering that matter you mentioned in Lagos and the subsequent release.
Yes.
But I'm making direct reference to Section 12 of the Constitution. And there are legs into subsection 1, 2, and if you look at subsection 3, there is, and the Constitution is very succinct. It says that this section shall not be presented to the president for assent and shall not be enacted unless it is ratified by a majority of all the houses of assembly in the federation. And that is the point that some of these states are furthering in the court to say they were not aware. The federal government went all by itself to procure or to establish this institution, and on that grounds, they are left out in that process, and on that grounds, that establishment is faulty and unconstitutional. Is it possible for us to repair it as a people? Because that is, to some people, ultra-vires.
You can only invoke Section 12 of the Constitution if you are talking of an agreement that has been ratified by Nigeria or by the president on behalf of Nigeria. And the law says such an agreement or a treaty will not become enforced, cannot be enforced in Nigeria unless it is domesticated, unless it is enacted into law by the National Assembly. We're not talking of any treaty here. We are talking of a law, of a bill sponsored by the executive. passed properly by the National Assembly. Nobody has said the required majority did not pass either the ICPC Act bill into law or the EFCC law bill into law. So we're not talking of Section 12. We are talking of Section 15, subsection 5, that has imposed a duty on the federal government, the state government, and local government to fight corruption and abuse of power in Nigeria. That's all. That's it.
Well, in all of this, one thing, apart from the legal arguments in court, the one fundamental thing that we need to look at as a people is whether or not corruption is really being fought. And I love the fact that there is a senator who is now looking at a bill which is, is in other countries like the UK, the source of wealth law, where a Nigerian or a public office holder will have to explain how he's got his wealth. Do you think this is one other way for us to effectively fight corruption in this country, Mr. Falana?
Come back again. When you're talking about federalism, my very good friend, Dr. Agbakoba, has written about what he calls cooperative federalism. It was expanding the theory propounded by the late Justice Nikki Toby in the case of Elufoye and the Federal Republic of Nigeria, when Justice Toby said, in our own environment, our own federalism is a cooperative one. And I'm saying the Supreme Court has further expatiated on this by talking about that these institutions are common agencies. They are not the agency of the federal government. The same thing goes for the police. It goes for the INEC and the State Security Service. There are decisions of the Supreme Court on this matter. But unfortunately, if you take police powers, for instance, I have written extensively on this, that governors our governors have failed to exercise police powers with the president as prescribed by the Constitution. Little for these other agencies. Once the Supreme Court has said, these are common agencies, it behoves on state governments to say, sorry, we want to have our members on the board of this institution. We want to tell the National Assembly, please perform your oversight functions as set out in Section 37 of the EFCC Act, which stipulates that not later than September 30th of every year, the EFCC shall submit its annual report to the two chambers of the National Assembly. This is done every year. The reports are never debated. Now, you also have the board. The EFCC has a 21-member board. Most of them are officials of the government. Director General of the State Security Service, Director General of Intelligence Agency, Governor of the Central Bank, and so on and so forth. It is high time now. We demanded for representation that will reflect the judgments of the Supreme Court, that these are common, that the EFCC is a common agency. If it is a common agency, state governments must have their accredited representatives in the board. Local government should have their members in the board. And of course, civil society organizations. There are 4 members now appointed by the president to that board. We should now move to have these members or civil society members appointed by the organization, nominated by the organizations that are involved. So my own position is that we should take advantage of the law to control these agencies, to monitor the activities of these agencies. And we must never forget the fact that the staff of ICPC and EFCC are not more than 10,000. And we expect them to monitor the activities of the federal government, 36 state government, and 774 local government. And that is why we should. It's not about, yes, it's good. We once had the law that once you are charged with unlawful enrichment, the onus was on you to prove that your money, your wealth has been earned legitimately. It was also the National Assembly that amended that law to remove that provision. I'm talking of the Supreme Court endorsed that provision in the case of Daudu and the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But the National Assembly members, I think in 2012 or thereabout, decided to remove that provision. If the concerned legislator wants to reintroduce that section, that would be very good. But what is important is for Nigerians to own the anti-corruption campaign, because the majority of our people are victims of corruption, monumental corruption.
Mr. Falana, let me take you quickly to the issue of the economy, because I know you and I have had conversations on these for a while. But you have asked, and other people have said, that the government, federal government, should reverse some of its policies in the removal of subsidies and maybe focus on some other things. But the World Bank is saying there must be consistencies in the policy direction, and if the federal government tries to reverse some of these policies, it spells doom for Nigeria and its economy for the nearest future. Let me get your view on that position of the World Bank.
I can predict here, I can say here, without any fear of contradiction, that the federal government will soon be compelled to review economic policies that are subverting the democratic process, economic policies that are pauperizing our people, economic policies that are increasing poverty in the country. The same World Bank has just revealed, to the embarrassment of the government, that we now have 129 million very, very poor Nigerians, or people they say are dimensionally poor, and that 14 million of them have been added in the last 1 year. The same bank is asking the government, please punish the Nigerian people by removing all subsidies. There is no country in the West, and I'm talking of the country that set up the World Bank and the IMF. There's no country in the West today that does not subsidize agriculture, education, and so on and so forth. As we are talking, I'm not sure whether the Vice President is back from Sweden. Sweden has the best welfare policy in Western world today. In fact, in the Norwegian countries now, and I think particularly, no, not Sweden, I think one of them.
Part of the Scandinavian countries, yeah.
In Holland, the country is closing down its prisons because young people are no longer committing crimes. Oh yes. In America today, President Biden has canceled close to 5 trillion student loans, and that is subsidizing education. In Europe, France, Britain, and the rest of them, they are subsidizing electricity, subsidizing gas, and so that people can live a better life. And by the way, Seun, why are our people going to Europe and America to have their children there? Why? Because the future is guaranteed for them. And we also have those laws here that have guaranteed a decent life for our people. We have the National Health Insurance Act in Nigeria. We have the People's Bank Act in Nigeria. We have the Pension Reforms Act in Nigeria. We have the National Housing Act in Nigeria. Now, it is high time we made these laws enforceable in our country so that the government can be accountable. So that the government can take care
if I may
of
jump
our
in
people.
quickly. Yeah, and I'd like to ask you, the government of the day, for example, will say that it has institutionalized a student loan scheme. It will also say that there is the credit call, the credit facility organization, to be able to give some security for welfare and social security to Nigerians. And they will also say that they are all going all out to give incentives and some very soft packages for the poorest of the poor in our society. But if you are saying that you are joining some of those who are advocating for a reversal of some policies, major would be the petrol subsidy scheme, the removal of that, and also the electricity subsidy, and what we have seen now in the Banea and the rise in the levies on those. What can you specifically tell this government that will bring the kind of succor that you are talking about if you truly oppose the World Bank stand? Because the World Bank says that you need to keep helping the poor so that you reduce poverty in the land and do not reverse some of these policies. But in your own view, what are the policies that you think they are not in the interest of the Nigerian people?
So let us take the World Bank and the IMF out of our discussion, because those agencies were set up, the Bretton Woods institutions were set up to underdevelop our countries, developing countries. These institutions impose or rather influence our governments to take loans when you can generate enough funds in your country. These institutions do not contribute to the task of recovering looted wealth for our country so that we can have money for development. All they are saying, let Nigerian poor people tighten their belt, according to them now, for 15 years. They came here in 1986. The World Bank influenced the Babangida military junta to impose the structural adjustment program on our people. We won then. And it didn't work. And the government said there was no alternative to SAP. At the end of the day, the economy was sapped. The currency was floated as we're having it now. And you had a sharp devaluation of the currency. Nigeria has not fully recovered. Later, they apologized. World Bank, you regretted the imposition of structural adjustment program. The same institution is coming back now by asking the government to embrace and impose and implement neoliberal economic policies designed by the same institution. What we are therefore saying, the government must abandon this policies. You must control your currency. I was surprised during the week, the governor of the central bank, Mr. Yemi Cardozo, said, oh, we are helpless. How can you be helpless?
All right, when Mr. Falana.
Black, what do you call them?
Mr. Falana.
The alternative market.
Yeah.
When they are fixing the dollar.
We are totally out of time, sir.
So the government must take control of the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Falana, for
why states or state governors would not want to be investigated. But talk to us and put this up perhaps as a base to our conversation, the legality or morality of this particular situation.
Thank you, Terry. I'm glad that you mentioned the issue of sentimentalism because most of the issues that arguments around this foundation of EFCC are arguments in sentimentalism and emotionalism. But we operate constitutional democracy, and since 1999, we have confessed to be a federal republic that operates constitutional democracy to be guided by the rule of law. And Nigeria as a country has had a very long history of anti-corruption fight. The FCC came into being in 2004. Before 2004, Nigeria had some measures, internal mechanisms of fighting corruption. And that does not mean that without EFCC, corruption will not be fought. Now let us look at the issue and the argument, without going into the legalities of the matter, because one could not accuse us of discussing a matter that is sub judice. After all, the Supreme Court has reserved judgment, and what we are doing is to more or less enlighten Nigerians about the core issues, just the same way a judiciary correspondent will enlighten the people with what's going on in the court. Now, EFCC was established on account of more or less a compression of United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which was an international treaty that Nigeria is a signatory to. And we have had in our constitution that before you bring in an international treaty to make it a law, a municipal law in Nigeria, it must pass through duly constituted process that is clearly specified in Section 12 of our constitution. And anything short of that, such a treaty will not be a law in Nigeria, and any law established on that treaty will look like a law established on a quicksand. Like we say in law, you cannot build something on nothing and expect it to stand. What we are talking about is foundational, fundamental. If you don't breathe life into an inanimate institution and expect it to have a life of a colossus, any institution that should have a life must be foundationally given such life. And what does the law provide? The law provides that, yes, National Assembly will make the law, but the states will have their concurrent input. And the question is there concurrent input by the houses of assembly of states in Nigeria, at least majority of them? The good thing is that the provision of the constitution did not say any definite majority, whether 2/3 or 1/3 or whatever. It said majority. So we can take it that even simple majority will suffice. 36 states of the country, at least simple majority means 19 out of the 36. So you now ask, is there anything wrong with 19 states at least endorsing the establishment of EFCC? The answer is no. There's nothing wrong. Then the next question will be, why would they not be involved? It is obvious that something was wrong when EFCC was established. It's not the fault of the EFCC, but the fault of the system that overlooked very critical aspect of our constitutionalism and our lawmaking process in a federal republic of Nigeria. Mark that word, federal. We can't be answering federal on paper. We must be federal in attitude. We must be federal in our procedures and lawmaking processes, such that the federated states must not be cast away when their inputs are required. Otherwise, the FCC will only be serving the federal government and not have anything to do with the states or the local governments. That is the crux of the matter. And anybody who argues otherwise is only trying to either be emotional or be sentimental.
All right, address this conflict, if I may put it that way, between that convention, which produced the EFCC, and the Supreme Court ruling of 2002, as was pointed out earlier today by Mr. Danebwala regarding the Ondo Attorney General versus the Attorney General of the Federation, that the National Assembly can legislate on corruption matters across the country under the exclusive legislative list, considering that the funding comes from the federal.
The matter that had to do with Attorney General Ondo State versus the federal government has nothing to do with the foundation of the EFCC. It has nothing to do with the establishment of the EFCC. Of course, there are so many matters that have been handled by the Supreme Court, many judgments that concern EFCC that have been given by Supreme Court, but none had ever talked about the foundation of the EFCC. And that is the issue. So we should not begin to jive away from the real issue. The real issue is EFCC establishment, did it follow the process laid down by the Constitution? And recall that our Constitution provides that any law that is not consistent with the Constitution, that runs contrary to the provisions of the Constitution, will become invalid to the extent of its inconsistency. So if EFCC establishment process does not follow the laid down procedure in our Constitution, then the establishment is invalid to the extent of such inconsistency or such clash with the provisions of the Constitution. So one should not begin to bring all those issues.
But what about the argument?
The argument?
But what about the argument of where the funding comes from? The EFCC is oversighting funds shared from the federal to the states.
The EFCC, as a matter of fact, the state did not ask the federal government to fund the EFCC on their behalf. If the EFCC is working for the federal government should fund it. Then each state
I'm talking about monies received from state governments from the federal government.
The Constitution provides that the state government should receive money. After all, that money comes from the states as well. Take, for example, where does the bulk of our money come from? Petroleum resources, they come from the states. Mineral resources, they come from the states. Taxation from the Inland Revenue Service, they come from the states. So the federal government cannot exist without the states, but the states can exist without the federal government in a loose federation. Because what we are even asking for, before the unitary system that came into being, the states were existing very strongly, or rather the regions were existing very strongly with very loose central government. So with the unitary system, the central government became very strong, whereas the states became a lot weaker. So one should not begin to advance the argument that the funding that is coming from the federation account is going to the states. After all, it came from the states to the federal and to the federation account, and then now down to the states. But most importantly, what does the Constitution provide? We cannot pick and choose what to obey as far as constitutionalism is concerned. If any matter or any provision of the Constitution does not go down well with our expectation as a people, we have option of review, an option of looking into it and then reviewing the Constitution and changing those things that go contrary to our expectations. So one should not say, oh, because the money is coming from the federal government does not make the money. The states make the money. Every fund that goes to the federal government originally came from the states. So that argument cannot stand at all.
While we may not be able to go into the legal complexities, just so that we don't appear to be subjugated, we can talk about the implication of this. If the Supreme Court ruling favors these states, considering the UN convention that produced this and Nigeria's fight against corruption, recall that that convention was primarily to focus on the fight and encourage countries to fight corruption. How will Nigeria be perceived? Nigeria's image in the eyes of the people, for those of the international community, with regard to the fight against corruption?
The laws of Nigeria are for Nigerians and not for the international community. What Nigeria should be worried about is how well are our people taken care of, and how well do we recognize and respect our laws, the laws that we make for ourselves, such that if anyone is not good, we can amend. We should not be more particular about satisfying the international community as against ensuring that our laws are made formidable for the good governance and development of our country. That is what is very important. And it's also important to state that it is never too late in time to run on the right track if you realize that you are running on the wrong track. Some people argue.
Barrister, if I may come in here, just so that,
yes.
Let me just respond to what you've just said, because you talked about our laws being our laws and we should not be that much answerable to international communities. But you understand that if corruption is so much affecting a society, that it affects foreign investments.
There is nothing wrong with states fighting corruption. That's what we're saying. And there's also nothing wrong with going to the states to give their concurrence to the Establishment Act of EFCC. The act can be amended so that the states will now give their concurrence. There's nothing wrong with all that. So we cannot semanticize and say, oh, international community is looking at us. In that case, we will subtract from our laws and then ensure that we undermine our processes just to please the international community. It is good to do things because we are in a committee of nations. But it is not right to do things that will hurt us internally just to please the outside world. What is important is this has been established. The Supreme Court itself has also said that this was an act that was predicated on UNCAC, United Nations Convention on Anti-Corruption, in a matter handled by the Supreme Court. And of course, we don't expect that the Apex Court will approbate and reprobate at the same time. So we don't need to begin to push the Supreme Court to the point where it will no longer look at the laws the way they are and begin to look at sentiments. It's a court of policy, not a court of equivocation or ambivalence. Supreme Court is not noted for such ambivalence.
Barrister Nziako, we have seen states reject beautiful reforms like local government autonomy and financial independence. And the concern now would be if this goes to the state, whether or not, yeah, of course, we're waiting for the Supreme Court judgment, but if this goes to the state, will it be ratified by the state houses of assembly? Because even they had rejected their own independence. I mean, the state houses of assembly as well. But then, beyond this, you talked about states. There's nothing wrong with states fighting corruption. Yes, take us down memory lane and talk about perhaps the mechanisms that states have in place to fight corruption.
you have to realize that states have the capacity to fight corruption. It's pedestrian to argue that the states cannot fight corruption without a federal government agency. It is akin to saying, let us wipe away state governors and then let the president continue to administer the entire country. Let us wipe away houses of assembly and then let only National Assembly make laws for all parts of the country, both exclusive and residual laws on exclusive and residual lists, and even the concurrent list, is akin to saying, wipe away the judiciary of the states because you have the federal structure. The Constitution contemplates that there has to be in the country a federation that will have the center and the federating units, each one with its own responsibilities. And it does not mean that it's only at the state level that you see corruption incidences or occurrences. There is also corruption at the federal level. And if EFCC seems to, or rather claims to be doing extremely well, it is not even enough to undermine the law that established it, because it will look like because somebody is a fake lawyer and he has won some cases in court, you allow the person to continue being a lawyer when the person did not go through law school nor be called to bar. We have incidences like that. You cannot say, oh, because the man is doing well on this side, let him continue, even when the foundation is faulty. We must establish strong foundation first and then build on that, because even as we speak, EFCC has never had the courage to call a former president of this country to account for his actions. Never, not even for once. Not even to sit down with them and ask questions, not to talk of investigation. But you see EFCC going to investigate governors that are still in office, and then there will be back and forth between the governors and the agencies. Corruption does not start and end at the state level. There is corruption everywhere. And for us to establish an institution that will fight corruption across the land, such institution must have the buy-in of the states. You could even have asked that the local government should be represented, but because local government can be represented by the states, at least that level of federal and state must put hands together, bring in their contribution for such establishment to have the kind of life that we expect it, such that just as it happens in other countries, the president or anybody for that matter can be called to give account of his stewardship. There's nothing wrong with it. So that we don't have an institution that will be available only for the federal government to intimidate the governors or intimidate the federating states at will. That's why they said some time ago that this catch-em-hold-em syndrome should not hold. And we must do things following due process of law. It is that due process of law that when it is breached, that is what will even drive away foreign investors, not this catch-and-hold attitude that we operate.
Now, from all you've said, it almost suggests that you do not think that the EFCC is strong enough to fight corruption at a certain level.
Well, from antecedents of the EFCC, we are looking at the trajectory, the antecedents, and the historifics. If it has been able to do so, we will see that the Nigerian people have been crying about so many issues and problems of corruption, which have become very endemic in our system. But it does not start and end at the state level. That is the crux of the matter. So EFCC must extend it to every part and every level and tier of government, irrespective of whose ox is God. And that is the thinking of those who made that convention at the United Nations. Other countries who adopted the same convention are running along that path, but in our own case, it has been fine-tuned in a manner that it seems as if it is a willing tool in the hands of the federal government or any party in power at the center against the federating states. And that is what we are saying should not be. But fundamentally, the establishment of EFCC, NFIU, ICPC, and the Money Laundering Act should be such that it must have the buy-in of the federating states in accordance with the provisions of our Constitution as exemplified in Section 12, which is very clear and very simple.
Okay. So as a way forward, are you saying that the EFCC should be strengthened by in whatever way, but should be ratified? Or are you saying that states are capable of fighting corruption at their own level? Perhaps you could suggest how corruption can be fought at the state level if the EFCC is not needed to intervene in state matters.
If, for example, going by the theory that you have laid down, that EFCC is operating for the federal government, in which case it concerns itself with only federal issues. Just like we have the Federal High Court that concerns itself with federal laws, and you have concurrently the state high courts that concern themselves with state laws. The same way EFCC can concern itself with federal issues of corruption, whereas the states will now establish their own agencies that will fight corruption. Kano, for example, in the most recent past, has been struggling to bring their immediate past governor to come and give account. And the optics are there indicating that the federal government is shielding the immediate past governor of Kano State. The Kano State did not tell you that they have no capacity because they have their own court. They didn't tell you that they have no capacity to investigate any infraction, the same way every state has the capacity to do so. But when you begin to give this headmaster impression, this overriding impression that anything that is not federal cannot work, then you are undermining the federal structure that we have. You're also undermining that name, federal, that is in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. There must be a difference between the military and the civilian democracy that we practice.
But you agree that these institutions, especially at state levels, must be strengthened enough such that they don't become political tools as well. Because the argument for some who listen to things like this would be that when one party hands over to the same party, no investigation is done. When it's an opposition party, then there are concerns as to oppression. So how do we strengthen institutions at that level? Now pay close attention to what's happening at the local government level with regard to the elections and the appointments overseen by the governor. You see what's happening and the allegations that state governors make sure that their parties win. How do we strengthen the anti-corruption body at the state level such that it is not going to be used as a political tool?
The fact has to be made that the federal government is not puritanical and should not be seen as such. The federal government is not holy and should not be seen as such, to the extent that only the states are corrupt. The fact remains that while the EFCC serves the interest of the federal government, it should not serve the interest of the state government because the states are not...
But Barrister Nzeko, my apologies, I don't think you heard the question. Barrister Nzeko, I don't think you heard the question. The question was more about strengthening this anti-corruption institutions at the state level.
Good. Strengthening the anti-corruption... Look, lawmaking process is an ongoing process. The same way that Kano is struggling to bring purity to its institutions, the same way every other state will bring purity to their institutions. What it takes is for the people to make demands, because the people of every state, the citizens of every state, should not rely on the federal government in making their demands. They have peer review in all things that they do. When they go to a governor's forum, for example, they will decide on what to do. But I can tell you that it is left for the states. The same way we have the state judiciary and all state organs and agencies, we can also have the state anti-corruption bodies. And like I said earlier, I keep saying that if we have to have a counterpart one at the federal level, let the states buy in, be ensured that it is there. Otherwise, the states can establish their institutions through the Houses of Assembly. It is an ongoing process. The Houses of Assembly can establish the institutions and ensure that they operate. It is the same argument that we are talking about state police. Some people will say that the governors will use state police just to witch hunt, as if policing will start and end with the election. Policing does not start and end with the election. The primary role of government is for security of lives and property of the citizens. So if state policing will work in other countries, there's no way it will not work in Nigeria. We operate American-style democracy.
Very well then.
Which is the federal the structure that we imbibe from America. In America, they have, down to the counties, they have their police. There are so many ways this can be done. The commissioner of police in every state is by election. So we can even start on that premise. Ensure that the people who populate the anti-corruption agencies at the state are appointed by plebiscite and ratified by the houses of assembly. And the judiciary has a lot of role to play in that regard. It is left for us to agree on basic principles, and then we will now find a solution out of it. The solution is not far-fetched and does not lie in using one body to overrule everybody else.
Recall that recently, 16 governors dragged the EFCC to court, questioning the constitutional power backing their establishment. Again, a respected son, Agbakoba, also insisted that the EFCC is an illegal and unconstitutional organization. According to Agbakoba, EFCC terrorizes Nigerians, and their model of operation is far out of their scope of authority. This is in contrast with what Femi Falana represents and his position. He has continued to insist that instead of the EFCC being scrapped like many has suggested, the law should be looked into and they should be strengthened to further discharge their duties more efficiently and effectively to the benefit of Nigerians.